Okay, welcome everybody. So to the first class on maximum entropy network ensemble. So maximum entropy model for complex networks. This is a field that has had an important development in recent years due to the fact that networks are becoming the tool to understand complex systems. And this complex system can come from different fields, including technological, social, and biological systems. So here, on the left, you see a picture of the internet. So, and this was one of the first picture of a big complex network that was available in the late 90s. And you can see large heterogeneities in the degree of the nodes and a structure which surprised the people which looked at it for the first time, because the internet was not like the power grid infrastructure which was designed. The internet evolved in a self-organized way by adding new lines between different routers. So here in the middle, you see a data set which was available a few years after, and is a social network data set in which was studied for investigating the role that social interaction has on the spread of behavior, and in particular the spread of obesity between this set of people. And you see the network is now enriched with metadata. So you have each node characterized by a variable, which is the size of the node. And then you have another example here on your left, which is an example of a biological network of genes in yeast, in which there is experimental data about genes was mutation act in a buffering or in aggravating way respect to single mutation of each gene. So you see, there is a large variety of data sets, and really there was a change of paradigm emerging in the late 90s, because complex systems have been studied by considering the function. For instance, in an ecosystem, people have studied, population size of a given species. But there was little understanding about the role of the interaction between the species, for instance. And this was because there was actually mostly a lack of data. And in the, sorry, I don't know what's happening here. In the late 90s, there was the emergence of many more data sets. Let me just solve this problem with sharing the screen. And so there were many other data sets, including social network, communication network, and biological network. And there has been really in recent years a boom of this large data set in which there is not only the knowledge about the interaction of who is interacting to whom, but also about metadata. So for instance, if a protein is lethal when it's knocked out from a cell, or things like that. So these networks that are found and describe the underlying structure of complex system, they are really interesting because their structure encode information. So these are networks that, you know, in the world of possible network with n nodes, they live in between, let's say, in between two extreme, random graph on one side and lattices on the other side. So random graph have been studied by mathematicians and are a graph in which you have a certain set of nodes n, and then this graph have every two node connected with probability p. So they are maximally random given an expected number of links that is a function of this variable p. And then in the other extreme, you have lattices, so very regular structure, which have symmetries that repeat the same periodically. And that, and these two extremes, in some sense, are network which do not have this capability to encode information, while complex networks that live in between completely random and completely regular network have the ability to encode information by, for instance, having a region that are more densely connected than other region of the network, by having the degree, so the number of links of each node, which is heterogeneously distributed, and so on. So really one wants to study network, and this has been the big change in the late 90s, because there is this powerful yet very simple idea that a network encode for the information content of the complex system, and this can really shed light on the function of the system itself. So, but here we speak about modeling. So why should we model a network? And the simple answer is that network models are the first step to solve inference problems in network. So in network, you have sometimes partial information. So not, for instance, not all the links are known. And this is the case, for instance, in some biological network, in which, for instance, in the human protein network, you have only 30% of the interaction. So how can you leverage on the information that you have to guess what are the possible link, where you having the full information? And the first steps is to have very good model for network that can exploit the information that you have and guess the missing data. This is also the case for financial network, because the relation between financial institution is confidential data. So some banks can have access to some of this information, but not to all. And then you really, if you really want to have an idea of what is the structure of the interbank network that is there, you can construct maximum entropy model based on the publicly available data, for instance, the bank balance sheet, and then you can perform your activity with this assumption, this maximum likelihood assumption. And finally, in social network, but also in biological networks, there is a lot of interest in this detecting the community structure and predicting the missing links, for which having a reliable model of network is the first step. So here in this module, we will cover the basic, the introduction of what are well-defined model of networks, and this will be very important if you want to continue and in this direction and understand this application. So networks, we are speaking about networks, but networks come in very different type and form. And so I prepare for you a classification. So network can be simple. like the internet. So in a simple network, a link is either existent or non-existent. So, and doesn't have directionality. So for instance, you know, if you have in the internet, two routers are connected, and in a protein interaction network, two proteins are connected if they bind to each other, so there is no directionality. A difference is with directed network, in which links have a direction and typically are indicated with an arrow. And this is, for instance, the case of the World Wide Web. So the network between web page, where one web page is connected to the other web page if there is a URL link connecting the two. So typically, you know, if you think of an, I don't know, the first web page of an undergraduate student, it might link to a very famous movie actor, but this link might not be in general reciprocated. And these are also happen in other social network where you have surveys asking to people to list the first, the most important 5 friends that they have in school, for instance, and not always these links are reciprocated. Then you have a signed network. So this happens a lot in biology. So you can have, for instance, a gene that is activating or inhibiting another gene. So there is a sign plus or minus. Or in gene, there can be 2 genes whose mutation is aggravating or was mutation is buffering respect to the mutation of the single pair of genes. So the sign is plus or minus. It's different from a direction, of course. In some sense, you can think of an enemy or friendship in a social network also. And then you have networks which are weighted, so you can assign a variable that describe the intensity of an interaction. For instance, in airport network, where airport are connected by flight connection, you can say, you know, what is the traffic on each flight connection? That's the weight. Or in a phone call network, you can say, you know, how long 2 people call each other in a week, for instance. And this weight is, of course, a feature and additional information about the link, but you can also have other feature, for instance, of the nodes. And this happens in social network where you can have, you know, different information about the node of the social network, but also, for instance, in this case of disease network, you might have disease of different size, indicating, you know, the severity and the comorbidity of this disease. These are, in any case, networks, so formed by nodes and links, but there is a full new word emerging in this last 10 years about generalized network, and we will touch a little bit also on that in the last class. So these are network that allows to go behind the pairwise interaction framework. And one set of those are multi-layer network, in which you have, for instance, a set of nodes interacting via different type of interactions. There can be, you know, in a social network, you can have, you know, mobile phone connection, email connection, or chat, or, you know, you name it, different means of communication. Then you can have simplicial complexes or hypergraph, which include interaction with more than simply 2 individuals. So for instance, in a collaboration for a paper, you might have 3 co-authors or 4 co-authors forming a triangle or a tetrahedra. And then also there are networks which are temporal networks, so in which links have a temporal tag. So for instance, I meet you today and I meet you in a week, right? And so this interaction occurs periodically every week, but I don't interact with you on Tuesday, for instance, or things like that. So, and this has very important consequence for diffusion of information and spreading. So let me, after this general introduction, let me tell you a bit about the structure of the model. So in lesson 1, we will introduce a network. So I will give you a formal definition of network. And I will also introduce to you maximum entropy principle, which will be the base for maximum entropy ensemble of network. But here in lesson 1 is just presented, just the information theory background for the maximum entropy principle. In lesson 2, I will instead describe how this maximum entropy principle applies to network, and I will present ensemble of network, a random graph, an exponential random graph model. In lesson 3, I will tell you about the fact that, ensemble comes in two different flavor, microcanonical and canonical, and then I will tell you more about the microcanonical ensemble, which is a set of network model to which the configuration model belongs, which is one of the fundamental model of network. And I will tell you about the non-equivalence of this ensemble. And in lesson 4, I will tell you a bit about ensemble with latent variables, so spatial network, block model, and so on. So with other information, not only the network, also other feature. And in lesson 5, I will tell you a bit about directed network, weighted network, and this generalized network ensemble. So this is my contact detail. So you can always email me at the QMUL address. So let me know if you have any question now. We are still recorded, but if you want to ask me a question, or we'll leave it for later. So this is just to give a general introduction to network. And now I will move to tell you about this actual first class, which is telling you about what is a network essentially. And then the second part will be devoted on maximum entropy principle. Okay, so there are references. So I will follow Barabasi book, Network Science, and first chapter of my book on multi-layer networks, structure and function, in which I introduce networks. And for the information theory book, I suggest you this very two classic book on information theory, Cover and Thomas and McKay. And of course, these slides can be, good slides for studying also in some sense. So let me introduce a simple network. So here we will speak about networks which are unweighted, undirected, just a network in which two nodes either interact or not, and the interaction is symmetric. So there is a distinction between graph and network. So a graph is a mathematical object, which is an ordered pair G formed by a set V of vertices and a set E of edges. And a network is the graph that describes the interaction between the constituent of a complex systems. And there is a slightly different terminology, due to historical reason of different community. So the vertices of a network are called nodes, and the edges of a network are called links. So We will always indicate by capital N the network size, so the total number of nodes in the network, and with capital L the set of links, the total number of links in the network. So an example, you have a network, a node, a link, like this example here. This is a network formed by 5 nodes and 6 links. The set of vertices is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The set of edges contains 1, 2. We don't have to list 2, 1 because the edge is undirected, so it's equivalent to 1. Then you have 2, 3, 2, 5, 3, 4, 3, 5, 4, 5. And the set of edges and the set of vertices characterize this graph. And then if this graph represents a complex system, we call it network. So again, there is this, to make it clear, so with capital total N, we will call the total number of nodes, which in graph theory is called vertices. Here we will use nodes. Capital L in graph theory are called edges. The number of edges in network theory are called links. And then there is another term that in graph theory is called loops. So it's a link connecting a node with itself. So one connected to one. And in network theory, we call it tadpoles. So example of complex networks, we name it already several. You can do the exercise to think about, the networks that are around you. So, for instance, actor networks, the networks whose nodes are actors, and links are connecting to actors if they co-acted in a movie. You have Facebook, individual, and Facebook friends are the interaction, but you have brain networks with nodes are the neurons and the links are the synaptic connection, or you have, ecological network whose nodes are the species and the links is who's eating whom. And in that case, that is directed also brain networks, neurons, the synaptic connection might have a direction. Okay. So here we will always speak about labeled network. So network in which the node of a label, so we can indicate it with a number, but you can also associate this number to a word, John, Katie, and so on. And we will consider different two networks whose topology is the same, but the label of the node is permuted. Okay, so this is, we will not consider isomorphism between the graph, which have different label. So this is important because in complexity science, really, if two proteins interact, it's very important that are these two specific proteins and not any other specific protein. In social networking, it might be less important, or in privacy problems, you might want to have not only anonymized ID, but also you might want to consider the property that in which you really consider unlabeled network. But for us, for this module, we will consider only labeled network. So a simple network is a network in which whose links are undirected, unweighted, and in which there are no tadpoles, no links connecting the node with itself. And they are described by an adjacency matrix. So a matrix A, which is an n by n matrix, where n is the total number of nodes, and the element ij indicates, if it's 1, indicates that I is linked to j, and if it's 0, it indicates that they are not connected. And this matrix for a simple network is clearly symmetric, because if I is linked to j, also j is linked to I. Okay, so we can take an example. For instance, the same example of before. So here for the first row, you notice that there is an element 1, 2, which is equal to 1. That means that node 1 is connected to node 2. In the second row, we have, for instance, here an element 1, 3, 2, 2, 3, which is 1, indicating that there is a link between node 2 and node 3, and so on. Okay. So the total number of nodes is the cardinality of the number of vertices. The total number of links can be expressed in terms of the adjacency matrix by the sum of all the entry of the adjacency matrix divided by 2, because every link between I and J is represented in adjacency matrix twice, indicating I connected to J and J connected to I. So you need to divide by 2 for having the number of links in the network. And a very important question of these two important properties, the number of nodes and the number of links, and is what is the order of magnitude of this number for a systems to be complex. So in general, there is a lot of attention to big data and large network, where N can be very large. So for instance, Facebook, online social networks, and so on. But actually, there is also the question of when does a network start to be complex in terms of its network size. And interesting, there are a lot of interesting data set, like the smallest brain, that is the brain of the worm C. elegans, has about 300 neurons. Or, you know, there is this engineerily constructed minimal cell with a minimum number of genes that still has the property of having a cell being able to duplicate, as 256 genes. Then you have power grids that are also about 1,000 nodes, also airport network about this size. Social network can be already complex with few nodes. There is this very important data set for social network of people in a karate club, which has 34 nodes, and ecological system are about 1,000 nodes. So it really, in general, if you have a network that starts to be interesting from the complexity point of view, you have, in general, this rule of thumb that if you have a network of between several hundreds or several thousand nodes, still there is some statistical property that are interesting and some non-trivial phenomenon that can emerge from their interaction. And then you have really large networks, of course, including the brain, which has a lot of neurons and even a lot of synapses. Online social networks, which includes a lot of ID, the World Wide Web, and the internet itself. Okay, so this is really the realm of big data. So, and this is what you expect by large complex networks, which are big number, but still, you know, in terms of if people come from physics, still numbers which are relatively small compared to the number of atoms in a room or things like that. Okay, so this is still large number, but still small respect to other fields in which statistical approach have been used. So here I want to indicate you some useful website where you can download and start playing with data set. So there is the Stanford Network Analysis Project, the network repository, which is quite rich also, and also provides some a table with very useful property about the network before you download. And then there is the Web of Life, which contain quite extensive data set about ecosystems. So really give a look if you want to play with that. So here, speaking about the number of nodes and the number of links, we will work on sparse network mostly. So networks was number of links is of the same order of magnitude of the number of nodes. So here I explicitly state what this means. And essentially, if you consider the number of links is of the same order of magnitude of the number of nodes, is several Cn, where C is between 1 and 10, let's say. Okay. So this means that the average degree of each node is finite. And if you have a set of models like this, it means that if you double the network, the average connectivity of each node, the average degree of each node, it remains fixed. So for instance, if you have a friendship with a network which is sparse, then you have a network of 100 people. The average degree of each one is, for instance, 5 friends. If you have a network of 500 people, everybody will always have in average 5 friends. Okay, so it's a network in which the average number of links of each node doesn't scale with the network size. And this is mostly the regime that we will consider, and is capturing the vast majority of the data set. So we have already introduced the notion of degree. The degree is the number of friends of node I, so the number of connection of node I. And in terms of the adjacency matrix, it is the sum over J of Aij is the degree Ki of node I. So this is the sum of the row, the element of the row I of the adjacency matrix, or equivalent, you can define Ki as the sum of the element of the column I of the network, because the adjacency matrix, because the adjacency matrix is symmetric. And then this degree, of course, the minimum degree of a node is 0. So you can have nodes that are not connected, that don't have any friend. And there is also a maximum degree that for a simple network, in a network of node n, is n-1, because if the one node is connected to anybody else, is connected to n-1, and is not connected to itself because tadpoles are not allowed. So really, we go ahead with our ensemble. The degree of each node, the degree of node 1 is 1 because 1 has just 1 links, but is also the sum of the element in the first row. The degree of node 2 is 3 because it's the sum of the element of the second row, and so on. So the degree sequence is the sequence of the degree of each node in the network. So the degree of node 1, the degree of node 2, and the degree of node n. And the average degree is the average of the degree of the node in the all the network, and is defined as twice the number of links divided by the number of nodes. And here, if you do a little bit of calculation, you find that actually this can be find out directly by considering the definition of the average degree, and then expressing the degree with this definition in terms of the adjacency matrix, and then using the fact that the sum of all adjacency matrix entries is 2, twice the number of links. So the average degree is twice the number of links divided by n. So, so you have a degree sequence in our example, which will be 1, 3, 3, 2, 3, and the average degree will be the sum of this degree divided by 5, so 12 divided by 5, and the maximum degree in this graph is clearly the maximum between these numbers, so it's clearly 3. An important property of a network is the degree distribution, so the probability that a random node has degree k, or the fraction of nodes in the network that have degree k. So this degree distribution can be expressed in terms of n of k, which is the number of nodes that have degree equal to k, where this delta here indicates the Kronecker delta. So pk is equal n of k, the number of nodes of degree k divided by n, and that's this expression. And this degree distribution plays a very fundamental role in network. It's one of the basic statistical property for networks. Is non-negative, is normalized, and it's possible to define n moments for this distribution as the expectation of k to the power of n over the distribution p of k. And we will use this notation, square bracket, to indicate this n moment. And interesting, the first moment, the average degree, can be expressed as we have expressed it before, as the sum of the degree divided by n, but also as an expectation over the degree distribution. Okay, so this is a kind of basic property, statistical property, when you have a sequence of data. I notice sometimes people also at the PhD level wants to see the derivation, but I will have a slide for that, but I will skip it now because we are already quite ahead of time. So here, for instance, we have this network, the degree sequence, the average degree, and the degree distribution. Okay, we'll have the P of 0, the probability that a node is 0, or the fraction of node of degree 0 is 0. The fraction of nodes which have degree 1 is 1 over 5. P2 is 1 over 5, P3, and P probability fraction of node of degree 4 is 0, because there are no node of degree 4 in the network. So this is the derivation of the above property, but really, if you want to, you can give a look more diffusely, but for now I skip it. And I'll tell you about another property of network, which is the clustering coefficient of a node I, which is a measure that defines the density of triangles around the node. So you have at the denominator the number of triangles passing to node I that can be expressed in this way in terms of the adjacency matrix. And at the denominator, you have the maximum number that you can expect given that node I has degree ki. So this is the fraction of all possible triangle that the fraction of triangle that pass to node I over the maximum number that can be expected given its degree. So it really measures how clustered, how local are the interaction. And of course, if the degree is 1 or 0, then the clustering coefficient is defined as 0. So this is defined in terms of triangles, which are very important, for instance, for social network and many data sets, but has some limitations. So for instance, In a square lattice, you can have very local interaction, but you have zero clustering coefficient. Okay, so you might want to extend this definition to something more general for square lattices, for instance. So the clustering coefficient, just by using this definition, you can see that node 1 does not belong to any triangle. It has degree 1, so the clustering coefficient is 0. For node 2, it belongs to one triangle. It has degree 3, so the clustering coefficient is 1/3, and so on. So this clustering coefficient is very important because it gives rise to the notion of small world. But in order to, before introducing that, I want to define with you some important property that are paths and shortest distance in the network. So a path is a sequence of nodes such that every consecutive pair of nodes is connected by a link. And a path length is equal to the number of links that you have to traverse to go from the source of the path to the destination. And a shortest path is between node I and node J is the path of minimum length that connects a node I and node J. And for this shortest path, you have uniquely defined the shortest distance between node I and node J, which is the length of the shortest path between node I and node J. So really, these are a notion that try to define, the equivalent of a geodesic in the network, so the shortest path. So for instance, from node 1 and node 3, you have the path 1, 2, 3, which is the shortest path, and the shortest distance between 1 and 3 will be 2. But of course, there can be other paths joining 1 with 3. So for instance, 1, 2, 5, and 3. That is not the shortest path. The shortest path might also not be unique, but the shortest distance is. Okay, so here is a set of shortest distance for this network. With this shortest distance, you can define global property about the network. So the average shortest distance, the average shortest distance between any two nodes in the network, and the diameter, which is the maximum of this shortest distance between any two pair of nodes. And of course, the diameter is greater or equal than the average shortest distance. And you can also define subgraphs, including loops or cliques. So loops is for instance, a triangle or a square. So between 2, 3, and 5 is a loop of size 3. Between 2, 3, 4, and 5, it is a loop of size 4. And in graph theory, these loops are also called cycle. A clique is a fully connected subgraph of the network. So for instance, all the link connecting node 2, 3, 4, and 5 form a 4 clique because these 4 nodes are connected in all possible ways. Okay, so this also is an important subgraph of a network. Okay, I am a bit behind with time. Yes, let me try to finish this part, and then maybe we can take a longer break later. I'm sorry for this. So with network, we can define network universality, so properties shared by many different data sets. And one of the first universality that was found in many different data sets is the small world universality, meaning that the network might have at the same time small diameter, So a diameter that grows only like the logarithm of the number of nodes, or even slower than that, and at the same time they have high clustering coefficients. So they have a clustering coefficient which is finite in the large network limit. So in the small world network is the small world property is a property that is shared by many networks. And the importance of this work by Watson-Strogatz that proposed the small world universality is also formulating a way to interpret this result found in many different data sets. And this model is a simple model in which you have node connected to nearby, a node sitting on a ring and connected to nearby nodes. And then with a given probability, you might rewire some of the link until with probability P, all the links are rewired. So you have essentially a random network, a network in which these nodes are randomly connected. So the important results that they find in this framework, and which show what can be the reason for the small world behavior observed in a very large number of data sets, is that this is on the x-axis here you find P, and as P changes from very small value toward 1, you have very different order of magnitude in which the clustering coefficient it remains very high, does not decrease. So it is very high, like in lattices, Here there are many triangles between neighbor friends. The interaction is very local. So the clustering coefficient remain very high also for very different range order of magnitude of P. But the diameter that is very high on the regular lattice, but is very small in the random graph, the diameter as you change P soon decrease and goes to very small value, meaning that there is a wide range of a region in the middle in which you can have the coexistence of some property of regular lattices that are very local, you're friend with the local neighbor, but also the shortest path are very small, meaning that it's possible to diffuse information quite rapidly. So there is only few shaken hand between you and a random person in this graph. So this is indicating the importance that random connection can have, also a little fraction of random connection and short and long distance connection, if there is an underlying space, can have in this in generating this small world property. The second property that has been found in many networks is the fact that the degree of the network are typically very widely distributed. It's not that in a social network everybody has 100 friends. There are very heterogeneous distribution of the number of friends, and this is, for instance, appearing quite prominently in online social networks. So networks that have such a wide variation of degree can be idealized with a power law network, which are just artificial network in which the degree distribution is described as a power law with an exponent gamma. And then if gamma is greater than 3, then you have an average degree that is constant in the thermodynamic limit. And the second moment, so the variance, which is also constant in the second limit, meaning that everybody has 100 friends and a variation, a standard deviation around this number, which is limited. But then if the exponent goes between 2 and 3, then although the average degree can remain constant in the large network limit, then you find very large deviation of the second moment, meaning that, you know, the second moment diverge, so the standard deviation diverge. So you can say, you know, everybody has in average 100 friends, but with an infinite standard deviation. This means that this number that you're giving have a large error, and indeed in the network there are large fluctuation, and this average degree is not really indicative of what happens typically for every node. And then there is even more dramatic case in which gamma is ranges between 1 and 2, and in that case also the average degree of the node diverge. So these are quite artificial network. You just impose a power law degree distribution. In reality, you might have that the degree distribution has only a tail, which is power law. So that this behavior is observed only for k much greater than 1. And in the range in which gamma is between 2 and 3, this statistical property we have mentioned before does not change, meaning that, you know, in actor network, in the World Wide Web or in the internet, you still have this very wide variation of the degree of the node, meaning that there are some nodes with many more order of magnitude more links than other nodes. And this is observed quite widely in a large set of network. And as a, you know, depiction coming from the course of Albert Laszlo Barabasi is this example of, you know, a road network that schematically is a network in which every road has a well-defined average number of connection, and the airport network in which you see this emerging, this very big airport, this hub that have instead order of magnitude more connection than other airport. So you see also visually it's quite different aspect of this network. And this has been shown to be a property emerging in a large variety of data sets. Of course, maybe the power law is not perfect, and there has been, you know, concern about the fitting about these power laws, but essentially what we are interested on is this tail, that the tail scales like a power law. And because this and not exactly that all the distribution is a power law, because this tail is very important and has dramatic effect on dynamics that takes place in this network. So for instance, diffusion dynamics or a response to perturbation of this system. Finally, the last universality property of network is the community structure. So the fact that network have regions which are more densely connected with the other. And this has been observed in a large variety of data sets, but although the presence of this community is universal, then the shape and the structure of this community is really specific for each data set. So this is also another example of community, which is quite neat. These are dolphin social networks, so dolphins that are linked to each other if they like to, if they typically swim together. And you see that the community characterizes set of nodes that are more likely to be connected to each other than to other nodes of the network. So this concludes the part on defining network and introducing to you network. Let me now stop the recording, if I can. Okay. Okay, so the recording has